Hi folks, we're going to take a look at page 226, number 23. So essentially they're asking us to solve this equation, and notice here they say determine an exact value for angle A. So the fact that they're saying an exact value instead of the exact value implies that there might be more than one answer. So we'll probably find a couple here. Okay, so they actually give us some steps to follow. So let's see what they ask. They say first write the cofunction identity related to this problem. Okay, that's the first thing I hope you notice, that you see a secant expression equal to a cosecant expression. So that hopefully makes you think of your correlated angles or your cofunction identities. So the question is which one are we going to use? Okay, now here I've got secant and cosecant, but you know what? We know in terms of the sine and the angle comparisons, it's the same as working with sine and cosine. Okay, so I'm actually going to work with sine and cosine to determine what I'm going to use and then just convert it to secant and cosecant. Okay, so let's say we call this, our angle theta. Okay, and we need to know what correlated angle I'm going to use. Okay, so let me draw a little picture here. So say I've got, sine, so instead of cosecant, I'm going to work with sine of some angle, and I need it to equal to cosine of my angle theta. So again here, if I draw theta in my first quadrant, okay, and I need the sine value to be equal to the cosine with the same sign. So one option will be to choose pi over 2 minus theta, okay? Because the sine value for this angle will be the same as the cosine value for my other angle. Now, if I want to pick an angle outside of the first quadrant, I'm going to have to pick the quadrant where sine is positive. And of course, that happens in the second quadrant. So the other angle I can work with would be pi over 2 plus theta. Okay, so let me start with the pi over 2 minus theta. So instead of sine and cosine, I'm just going to write that as, sorry, I said instead of sine and cosine, we'll use cosecant and secant. Okay, and so we know that cosecant of pi over 2 plus theta is equal to secant of theta. Okay, so again, it was perfectly fine to work with sine and cosine, just convert it now to cosecant and secant. Okay, so if this is my angle theta, then this 3a has to be equal to pi over 2 plus theta. Okay, and so this is what's going to help me determine an equation that's going to involve a. So 3a has to be equal to pi over 2 plus my angle theta, which in this case here is just the angle a. And here I've got now an easy linear equation to solve. Okay, so let's bring that to the other side. And I just realized I worked with the plus theta first instead of the minus one. That's okay. So here 3a minus a is 2a equals pi over 2. And so a is equal to pi over 4. Okay, so there's one possible answer. Okay, just to show you that we can do it for another one, let's work now with, instead of pi over 2 plus theta, we know we can work with pi over 2 minus theta. Okay, and so here 3a needs to be equal to pi over 2 minus theta, which in this case here is my angle A. And again, I just solve. This becomes 4a equals pi over 2. So a divided by 4 is just pi over 8. Okay, so there's another possible solution. Okay, so just to check that we do indeed have the right answers, okay, let's actually check both sides of the equation. Okay, so let's start with the pi over 4. So secant of pi over 4 would just take 1 over cosine. So 1 divided by cosine of pi divided by 4. Of course, make sure your calculator's in radians. Okay, and here looks like we got 1.414. So on one hand, got 1.414. Okay, and on the other side, let's check this. So here, cosecant. So we'll do that as 1 divided by sine of 3a. So 3 times pi over 4. 3 times pi over 4. And check that out. And yeah, 1.414. So this answer checks out. Okay, let's do the same thing with our other answer. Okay, so we've got secant of pi over 8. So 1 divided by cosine of pi over 8 equals 1.082. And then on the other side, we've got cosecant, so 1 divided by sine of 3 times pi over 8. So 3 times pi over 8. And so there we go. This answer checks out also. Okay, so just to recap. Now they gave us the hint about looking for a cofunction identity, but hopefully when you see secant, cosecant being equal or even negatives of each other, you need to be thinking about a cofunction identity. Okay, number 2 is I use a trick of working with sine and cosine because I figure I'm more familiar with working with sine and cosine to determine which cofunction identity, or in this case here identities, that I could work with. So I was able to work with pi over 2 minus theta and pi over 2 plus theta. Okay, and then from there assign the angles, okay, to the correct ones in your cofunction identity, and then just solve for whatever you're looking for. Okay, that's it for this one.